Hey, Winnie Anderson here. I'm the host of the Courageous Entrepreneur Show, the show that shares information and inspiration to help you break free from self-doubt, limiting beliefs, and disempowering patterns, and helps you break through to create the thriving, successful business you dream of and deserve. The show has been on sort of a hiatus right now. My computer crashed a couple of weeks ago, and so that really threw a monkey wrench into the regular release of episodes. So I've been coming on and doing live episodes instead. So that's why I'm here instead of a recording. And today I want to talk to you about a very big issue that I've been thinking a lot about, and that is this issue of conditioning. And I really want to talk to those of you who have, like me, come from a corporate or organizational environment. I started my career in retailing, actually, probably like a lot of you did. And when I was working part-time, put myself through college, I got a job working for the nation's largest privately owned chain of video clubs. That's way back in the 80s when video clubs were hot, and I had gotten promoted into a position as the organization's regional trainer for the Philadelphia region. But it was not my first professional job. That was my position at an employment agency, believe it or not, in the early 80s. Started out as a recruiter, my all-time favorite job. The point is these initial employment experiences were incredibly important, as they were to you. And they really started to indoctrinate me into what professional life was like. And every organization that you're in, every organization has what's called a culture. And in business life, we call it the corporate culture. But whether you are in a volunteer organization, maybe you participate in a nonprofit, you're in a faith-centered organization, your own family, every group has its own culture. And back when I used to work in HR, we used to refer to the culture as the personality of the company. And that's because a company's culture is based on many of the same things that your family culture and your own belief system are based on. So, and your own personality. So corporate culture is based on things like beliefs, values, shared experiences, standards, and how the organization operates. And its approach, of course, to customer service, to the delivery of its offerings, and to its treatment of the people who make up its team. And of course, I have notes, so I'll be glancing down every now and then to look at my notes. So the culture that you grow up in as a professional has an incredibly powerful impact on you. And you've probably been watching the news and with, of course, the Me Too movement, the Time's Up extension of that movement. And now the latest big awful story was with the Olympics, right? And with those team members, those athletes, student athletes who were abused by that disgusting doctor who was masquerading as a doctor who's a pervert. And so a lot of what happened within that organization speaks to the culture that those individual organizations had created. It's a culture of silence, of not paying attention to people who raise a problem and a concern. So that's, in a nutshell, what culture is. And it really pushed me to talk about this today because, yes, that particular trial his name is Larry Nassar, that particular trial wrapped up at, I think it was the end of last week, with the judge sentencing him to over 100 years in prison. And then he's got a couple of convictions that, he's never getting out of jail. He'll be in jail long past he's dead. But one of the things that really struck me about that situation was how the story really got broken, and it was with the Indiana Star. The Indiana Star, of course, publication, a print publication, so print is not dead. Indiana Star had some reporters who were working on the story. And what's really powerful, there's a lot that's powerful about this, but one of the things that's really powerful is how the reporters who broke the story talked about how long it took them to actually put that story together and then get ready to release the story. They were really proud of the fact that their organization allowed them to work on this long story, to do the research necessary, to make sure they were backing up their, the evidence with multiple sources, doing all of those right things that the media is supposed to be trained to do. So, as I was thinking about that and reading the final article about that was interviewing one of the reporters, it was this thinking about how the organizations that I belonged to, how they influenced me and how they varied. And then also how they conditioned me to become the person that I am today. And also my husband, he works in corporate life, and we talk about things at work. And he was talking about something that really made me have this out-of-body experience while I was listening to him that again reinforced this issue of culture. So when you think about it, many of us have been in corporate life, organizational life, almost all of our lives. I started working when I was about 15 years old. My very first job, I was actually a hall monitor at the night school at my local high school, but my first real job, of course, was at McDonald's, like so many people's were. So that has a culture, right? The McDonald's organization at that time had a culture, and the individual store that I worked at had its own culture. It wasn't always healthy, I can tell you that. Then as I moved through college, that has its own culture, and we're seeing that play out in these stories about Michigan State and the athletes that were abused. But every organization has its own culture. And then I get my first professional position, and I'm so excited to have this job. I was finally going to be working in human resources. I had my little associate's degree, and I was really looking for something that would be impactful for me and get me off on a great start with my career. And I worked for an incredibly abusive boss. He was verbally abusive. I'd be ashamed to tell you this kind. I don't know why I'm ashamed, because it was him. But the kinds of things that he called me and said to me and to the other people in the office, it was humiliating. It was really terrible. He called me by, I won't even get into it, but anyway, it was terrible. So when you're constantly exposed to that kind of abuse, and that's what it was, it impacts you. You begin to see yourself as somebody who is less than, right? So then you go to your next job. So my next job after that one, again, was still in human resources. I was working in Philadelphia at the time, and I got a job as an interviewer for Olston Temporary Services. They were the third largest temporary service in the country at the time, and I was an interviewer and recruiter for Olston. Loved it. But they had their own brand of crazy. There were a lot of positive things about it, though. One thing that was really positive about many of the companies that I did work for at this time was I was allowed to make mistakes. I wasn't expected to be perfect. Naturally, they wanted me to be, and naturally, they wanted me to do a great job and to not make mistakes. But what mistakes I did make, they weren't earth-shattering. I was always allowed the opportunity to learn why that was considered a mistake, and then what I could do to correct it, and what I could do to make sure that I didn't repeat that same mistake again. Didn't mean that I never made another mistake, but it meant that I learned from what happened and I changed my behavior. So just think about that for a second. Think about the places that you've worked in and how were mistakes treated. I know as I progressed and worked in larger and larger organizations, eventually I worked for I worked for some really big companies. I worked for Manville, which was a horror fest. I worked in the fiberglass insulation, the building products division, not the asbestos people. But when I got to work at a casino hotel in Atlantic City, it was probably for me, it was the most complicated organization, right? Not that Manville wasn't huge, because it was really a worldwide company. But so in working in this organization, I was, again, fortunate that I worked in a place and I worked in a department where mistakes were not seen as the end of your career normally. Not that there weren't people who made such big mistakes that that's it, you were out. But we were allowed to make mistakes within a level of parameter, and we were given that opportunity then to correct our behavior and to learn from those mistakes. So if you think about that, if you worked in an environment where you were not treated well when you made a mistake and where you were severely punished, no matter how small that mistake may have been, then that's going to set you up for when you're out on your own, you're going to be afraid to make mistakes, right? It's because of conditioning. Conditioning is when you have almost an automatic response, really an automatic response from something that's happened to you. And we're all conditioned from the time that we're born, right till now. The key is to become aware of that conditioning and to decide how are you going to deal with it. So I want to share with you some of the different things that corporate and organizational life can condition you about, and especially focus on those things that can then condition you in a negative way. So first of all is this issue around, the strategy, the vision, the mission, and working towards completing it. I worked in human resources, as I said, and we were always actively involved in helping other departments and even helping the company articulate its vision, and then helping other departments within the organization to articulate their own vision and mission and be able to move forward on that. But if you did not work in an environment that allowed you to see what the big picture is and then how your work fit in and supported that big vision, it may then create some struggle for you to focus on what it is that you're ultimately trying to create. And that's really what your work is doing every day as you move forward. So again, you want to think about that and think about how your past experience may keep you from getting really clear vision. And of course, if you were never actively involved in the planning of your vision, even your department's vision, then you might struggle in coming up with your own. Another way that we get conditioned negatively as part of an organization is we're always working to support somebody else's vision and mission. So it can be hard for us then to recognize and articulate what it is that we want and what we're trying to create. We get so conditioned to thinking about others that it may be difficult for us to think about ourselves. So that's another way that corporate life can condition you negatively, is with boundaries. I've always worked in service organizations. So service is the very first thing that I think of. And I know you can probably relate to this too. In corporate life, one of the worst things that somebody could say about you was that you were not a team player, was that they asked you for help and you didn't give it. I still remember the few times when I asked individuals to help me with things, projects or that sort of thing, and they told me no. So if you are conditioned to always say yes, then that can make boundary management difficult for you when you're out on your own. Examples are, and again, you're hypersensitive to service, right? So an example could be when a client asks for help and you've quoted the project and they ask for something else in addition to that. Oh, while you're doing that, can you do this? And you don't want to look like you're not a team player. You don't want to look like you're not service oriented. So you say yes. And before you know it, you're dealing with project and scope creep, which we also deal with in corporate life. And now we're not making the profit margin that we had intended to, and we're actually earning much less, right? When you break it down over an hourly rate, we're not making the amount of money that we had intended to on the project because scope creep and poor boundaries have taken over. So other ways that corporate life can condition us for struggling: pricing our services. We're used to thinking in terms of salary, right, or hourly wages even. So when you break down the hourly rate that you're getting, one, if you're a woman, I can almost guarantee you have probably been, hey, thanks for the love. I can't see who has come on, so feel free to say hi in the chat. So if you are a woman, I can almost guarantee you that you've been underpaid. It's a fact of life, statistically, that we're underpaid, and it becomes a way of life in organizations. So and it can be part of the subconscious culture. So if you have been dealing with that, you start out on your own, under earning, right, through your corporate life, and now you've got to price your own services. So this can be really problematic, and it can lead to a sudden awareness of, you got a money story that you didn't even realize that you have. So the issue around pricing your services, it can really be challenging as we look to find that sweet spot of the right price for the market, the right price for us to earn the profit that we want, and the right price to create is we're creating value for others, and we're generating the revenue that we want for our own lives. So you can also, how that corporate culture plays in a part is we're limited by the compensation structure and the compensation philosophy and approach. Every organization should have one, and they probably do, whether it was conscious or not. So another way is abusive behavior. I don't know about you, as I shared, my first professional boss, it was abusive, and I have a history of working for abusive bosses. I don't know if that's me or just the fact that there's a lot of abusive bosses out there. Maybe Jeff Rock could probably tell us, because he talks a lot about being abused at work as well in his work around story. So when you are continuously abused at work, and typically it's verbal abuse, and it's, they're gaslighting you and all kinds of playing psychological games, that can play significant havoc with your self-esteem. So again, that's then going to cause you to struggle when you're out on your own, when you suddenly then realize that now you have beliefs that you're not good enough, maybe you're not even worthy of the success that you dream of, and you certainly deserve. That's why it's part of the tagline for the show. So you really want to reflect on that as well. What have been your work experiences with bosses, with coworkers? Did you experience abuse? And how could that now be haunting your thoughts as you're out marketing yourself and marketing your services? And I just want to share that this is not something that people who are in startups or who are not at, not at six figures or $1 million, something that only people who are not really thriving experience. That's not true. As you grow within yourself as an individual and as an independent professional, you'll find these little voices start haunting you, and it just changes where it's focusing. And we experience this at every level we go through, right? So that's how we get stuck at a plateau, and we're always trying to break free from those plateaus. So know that those scars run deep, and they can really end up putting additional obstacles in front of you. So you can also be conditioned in a very positive way too, when you were the big fish in a small pond, right? There were probably very few people who did what you did, and you were the resident expert in a specific category of activity or specific thinking. I was considered the resident expert on, believe it or not, of all things, the Americans with Disabilities Act. I was put through an extensive training and was the go-to person when it came to issues related to employment and the ADA. Go figure. I'm not an expert now, believe me, but we're considered the resident expert, right? We're the sought-out person for people who have questions around X issue. I was also the resident expert on career paths when I was working in recruitment and what would be a good path for someone who wanted to achieve X result in their career. So you had a specialty too. You were a resident expert as well. And it was the kind of thing that just everybody knew, right? That you were the resident expert. They just automatically came to you. Or you had positive gossip, I call people who said, oh, you want to find out how to do X, you got to go talk to that person. You have this problem, you got to go talk to that person. So you want to think about, was I the resident expert? And now you've got to promote yourself and help other people recognize you as a resident expert. Oh my gosh, the baggage and the stories that we tell ourselves around this. We know that, you don't want to say in your marketing, I'm an expert in, you want other people to say that you're the expert. But what you do want to do is you want to demonstrate your knowledge and expertise, right? We used to call them KSAs in HR, knowledge, skills, and abilities. You want to demonstrate that, and you do that by adopting that as your strategy in marketing your services. Right. That's what I refer to that as a pre-selling strategy. So if you hate sales in its traditional sense, a pre-selling strategy is awesome for you because it allows you to demonstrate the knowledge, skills, and abilities that you have. Oh, thanks. Awesome. I see somebody sending me some love, but unfortunately, I can't see who you are. So if you can say hi in the chat, that would be awesome. Because I see the numbers and I see your smooches, but I don't see you. I don't know why. I usually do. So anyway, all right, back to this. So this is where you can really struggle, right? You never had to promote yourself. Your last promotion was to get into the job that maybe got you hired, or as you go for formal interviews within your organization structure, but really your reputation is what's speaking for you. And when you think about it, you are marketing yourself every day by demonstrating your expertise, your knowledge, skills, and abilities. So when you embrace a pre-selling strategy for your marketing and sales strategy, it just takes the pressure off, because what you're doing is you're embracing the philosophy of giving. And you're helping people to make the best decision for them. So you might also have been conditioned in some other ways, like in perfectionism. And this gets back to a fear of making mistakes. This is really terrible. I mean, I saw people, by the time I left corporate life, I saw people who, my organization was changing. That's one of the reasons why I left the casino hotel I was in. And there were some people who made mistakes who were never able to overcome that one mistake. It's like their professional reputation was completely ruined. And their only opportunity was to either get out of the department they were in or to actually leave the organization entirely. And, I think that that's a shame, because that's redemption, it's part of the whole thing about helping somebody learn and also to learn to make judgments and to make sound decisions. So if you grew up in an organization where your only defense against making mistakes was perfection, you're setting yourself up for struggle when you're out on your own, because of course, we need to pursue excellence, not perfection. Perfection is actually a shield, as Brene Brown calls it, and it actually is a way to keep us hidden. And often it's a way to keep us not launching, not completing anything, not finishing anything. And when we do that, then we make sure that we're not going to be criticized, because we're not putting anything out there to be criticized. So this is all part of the conditioning that we experience, and you really want to think about that. Another way, sorry, that was my notes page. Another way that we get conditioned, and there are tons of them, I'm just going to hit this last one to highlight it, is through our limited exposure and knowledge of technology. This depends, of course, on your organization. When I left the Manville, which was way back in the late 80s, when I left there, I had 2 computers. I had this whole suite of software. We had email, already in the late 80s. And, we had lots of ways that we leveraged technology. So when I left there and I went to work at the casino, I was shocked, frankly, that they still use typewriters. I'm like, do I have to type on stone? And do you have stone tablets too? What's the matter with you? And that when I was able to, create a memo or send a message out, and I was going to have it out delivered to the people in the shop, right, in the manufacturing area of the building, I didn't have to run it by my boss. I just typed it up and put it on the bulletin board and said, read this. But when I worked at the casino, I was not able to send out one announcement. I couldn't do one thing without having my boss review it first. And, please, I could go off on a big tangent about that, but I won't. So you really want to think about, how did a fear of mistakes, how did a limited exposure to technology, how does it then limit you and cause you to struggle out on your own? So I'm just going to run through some quick ways to how you can deal with this, and then I'll let you go for the day. So first of all, you want to be able to develop the honesty of assessing your strengths and your areas that you're not so strong in. I want to get back to that for a second too. Don't have any false humility. Be able to say what you're good at and be able to embrace what you're good at. Now, remember, in corporate life, so here's another conditioning issue. The focus was always on what you're weak in, right? You'd have this, you could be a giant star, and they had to find one thing, right? You couldn't be perfect. They had to find one thing, an area for development that they would have to put down on your performance review, right? And that was always the big conversation. It was never how to celebrate your strengths and how to amplify them. It was always how to fix what was wrong with you. So that creates then a focus on your part on everything that you see that is a weakness as opposed to a strength. So how do you deal with this? Embrace your strengths and forget your weaknesses. Well, don't exactly forget them, but get help. There's plenty of help out there that you can get, right? You can hire great folks who can support you. And we need to start setting aside money so that we can get help from experts so we can stay focused on truly what we're great at. Now, the other thing to remember is that as you grow in your organization, the one that you're building, your needs for skills are going to evolve, right? As you move away from the doing into the managing and then the leading. So you're going to need to call on those corporate skills that you had, and you may need to develop some understanding in areas like finance if that was not an area of strength for you. So you also want to, though, start tuning into what you're resisting and why you're resisting it. So I have a handout, and you can just say yes below here, and I'll make sure that you get a copy of the handout. I have a handout that I'm about to release on my website. It's a worksheet that helps you step through what you're resisting, why you're resisting it, and how you can work around and get around that. So if you would like to have that worksheet, let me know. Just say yes below, and I'll be happy to get that to you. As I said, I'm going to be releasing it on my website as an opt-in very shortly. So I'd love to get your feedback on whether or not it helped you. So you want to recognize what you're resisting and then learn to deal with that, and learn to either face it or, well, you got to face it, or either learn to go through it, go around it, go underneath, over it. Learn it, do whatever it is you need to do to deal with the issue that you're resisting. But it starts with acknowledging that you are resisting. You want to decide what you're going to change and what you're going to work around, right? There's a lot of stuff that I just work around because I'm not interested in changing, frankly, that particular issue. It might be, in my opinion, it might feel too hard for me to change. So I'm going to work around it. One of the things that, to be honest with you, I really don't like doing video. Here's a secret. I really don't like doing it. I do it, I learned to do it, and I worked around it because I know the value that video has, and it then helps me create content from the video. So if I had to pick, I wouldn't do it at all, but I know how powerful it is. So this was something that I chose to face head on and to deal with. Right? Other people, if you don't like doing video, maybe you do audio. So there are lots of ways that you can work around, build your muscles, and then get ready to tackle your fear or resistance head on. So you also want to recognize that as your business evolves, as I said, your role is going to change, and you may need to finally address something that perhaps you did not address early on. And you also want to make sure that you always refer back to and approach or deal with the 6 pillars of courageous success, right? That's really what this comes down to. So those 6 pillars, as a reminder, are clarity, beliefs, environment, strategy, skills, and action, right? So, and action, what do we learn in corporate life? Not to act too fast, because as soon as this was my husband and I were talking about this, he had waited to deal with something because he knew that somebody else was going to come along and change the project. That's exactly what he did. So we get conditioned again to not move too fast sometimes in corporate life, but out on our own, speed is, the universe loves speed, and it behooves you to take action sooner rather than later. So remember, you want to fall back on the 6 pillars of success, of courageous success: clarity, beliefs, environment, strategy, skills, and action. All right, so that's what I have for you today. So if you have appreciated this information, I hope you'll share it with your community, with those who you may know who are corporate escapees as well, or organization escapees, if you think this information would serve them. The Courageous Entrepreneur is a podcast. It airs in audio format as well as video format, and they're pre-recorded. They typically air on Mondays, and then on Wednesdays I do the after show, and that is a Facebook Live where I talk about some element of that week's episode that I want to amplify for you. The show can be found at my